What if your mind isn't tired because of stress, but because it forgot how to be quiet? Most people think they want peace, until peace finally arrives. Then suddenly, they feel uncomfortable, restless, almost trapped inside their own head. And maybe you've felt this before. You finally get time alone. No work, no pressure, no responsibilities for a moment. And instead of relaxing, you reach for your phone. Without thinking, almost automatically. Not because you need something important, but because silence itself feels heavy. That's the part nobody talks about. People today are not just addicted to stimulation. They're afraid of stillness. And the scary thing is, most don't even realize it's happening. Because modern life trained your brain to escape silence before you can even feel it. The second your environment gets quiet, your mind gets loud. Thoughts appear instantly. Random memories, overthinking, existential questions, regret, loneliness, fear, emptiness. And before those feelings fully surface, you distract yourself again. Scroll, swipe, refresh, watch, consume, repeat, every single day, until distraction stops becoming entertainment, and becomes emotional survival. That's why people can spend 6 hours online, but struggle to sit alone for 10 minutes. Because the problem isn't boredom anymore. It's withdrawal. Silence withdrawal. Your nervous system became so dependent on noise, that peace now feels unfamiliar. And unfamiliar things feel dangerous to the brain. Think about it. When was the last time you sat in complete silence? Without touching anything, without checking something, without needing stimulation every few seconds. Most people can't do it anymore. Not because they're weak, because their brain has been rewired. Every notification, every short video, every endless scroll, every dopamine hit, slowly trained your attention span to crave constant movement. And once your brain adapts to that speed, stillness starts feeling emotionally uncomfortable. That's why relaxing feels weird now. You sit down to rest, but your body feels tense. Your hand reaches for distraction automatically. Your mind searches for noise. Because silence starts exposing things you've been avoiding. That's the real reason people fear stillness. Not because silence is painful, but because silence reveals pain. And most people spend their entire lives running from that moment. They keep themselves busy constantly. Music while walking, videos while eating, scrolling before sleep, scrolling after waking up, noise during every empty second. Because the moment silence appears, they're forced to meet themselves again. And honestly, that's terrifying for a lot of people. Because underneath all the stimulation, many people feel emotionally disconnected from themselves. They don't know what they truly feel anymore. They don't know what they genuinely enjoy. They don't even know who they are without distraction. That's why free time feels uncomfortable now. Not because rest is bad, but because rest removes escape routes. And once the distractions disappear, your real emotional state becomes visible. That's why some people suddenly feel anxious during quiet moments, or emotionally numb, or strangely empty, because overstimulation buried their inner voice for so long, that silence now feels unnatural. But this didn't happen overnight. It happened slowly, so slowly, that people started calling it normal. Being constantly stimulated became modern life, and the world rewards it too. Always busy, always online, always consuming, always distracted, as if slowing down means you're failing somehow. But deep down, people are exhausted, not physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, because the human mind was never designed to absorb endless stimulation every waking second. And eventually, the nervous system starts breaking under that pressure. That's why even peaceful moments feel uncomfortable now. A quiet room feels heavy. A slow day feels empty. Doing nothing feels wrong, not because peace is bad, but because your brain forgot how to exist without noise. And the longer you avoid silence, the harder it becomes to face. Because every distraction delays the conversation you need to have with yourself. And maybe that's why you can't truly relax anymore. Not because your life is falling apart, but because your inner world has been ignored for too long. And the strangest part is, most people don't notice the damage until they finally try to slow down. That's when it hits them. The anxiety, the restlessness, the uncomfortable feeling that something is wrong even when everything is technically fine. Because distraction hides emotional weight temporarily. But silence exposes it immediately. That's why some people stay busy every second of the day. Not because they love productivity, but because movement helps them avoid themselves. And once you see that, you start noticing it everywhere. People walking while staring at screens. People unable to eat without watching something. People checking notifications every few minutes even when nothing important happened. People falling asleep with noise because silence feels unbearable. At first it looks harmless, normal even, but underneath it, there's a deeper psychological problem growing quietly. The brain no longer knows how to rest naturally. And when the brain loses that ability, peace begins to feel emotionally unsafe. That's why some people panic during stillness. The room becomes quiet, and suddenly their thoughts become louder than ever. Not happy thoughts, not peaceful thoughts, the hidden ones, the unresolved ones, the thoughts distraction kept buried. Questions like, what am I doing with my life? Why do I feel emotionally disconnected? When did I stop feeling excited about life? Why do beautiful moments feel empty now? And maybe the scariest one, who am I when there's nothing distracting me? That question changes everything. Because many people secretly built their entire identity around stimulation. Always consuming, always reacting, always occupied, always mentally escaping. So when silence removes all that, they feel lost. Not because they have no personality, but because they've spent years disconnected from their real inner world. And modern life made this problem worse than ever before. Because your attention is constantly being hunted now. Every app, every notification, every short-form video, every algorithm, designed to keep you stimulated for as long as possible. Not peaceful, stimulated. There's a difference. Peace calms the nervous system. Stimulation excites it. And when your brain spends years in constant stimulation, calmness starts feeling emotionally unfamiliar. That's why some people say they feel weird on vacation, or uncomfortable during quiet nights, or anxious when they finally have free time. Because their nervous system became addicted to noise. And addiction creates dependency. That's why the phone feels impossible to put down sometimes. It's not just entertainment anymore. It became emotional regulation. The moment discomfort appears, your brain reaches for stimulation automatically. Not consciously, automatically. Like survival. That's why people scroll even when they're exhausted. Watch things they don't even care about. Refresh apps without purpose. Open the same platforms repeatedly. Because the brain isn't searching for meaning anymore. It's searching for interruption. Anything to avoid fully sitting with itself. And honestly, that might be one of the saddest realities of this generation. People became strangers to their own minds. They know what everyone else is doing, what everyone else thinks, what everyone else posts, but they barely understand themselves anymore. Because self-awareness requires stillness. And stillness became rare. Most people haven't truly been alone with their thoughts in years. Real silence. No stimulation. No performance. No escape. Just presence. And presence feels terrifying when your inner world has been ignored too long. That's why even rest feels exhausting now. Because your body sits still. But your mind keeps running. Constantly searching. Constantly consuming. Constantly avoiding. And eventually, the nervous system forgets what genuine peace feels like. That's when emotional numbness starts appearing. Life begins feeling blurry. Days blend together. Moments stop feeling deep. Everything becomes fast, temporary, distracted. You stop experiencing life fully. You only react to it continuously. And maybe that's why so many people today secretly feel empty. Not because life has no meaning, but because overstimulation disconnected them from experiencing meaning deeply. Because meaning only appears when attention slows down. When presence returns. When the mind becomes quiet enough to actually feel life again. But silence is difficult for an overstimulated brain. Because silence forces awareness. And awareness changes everything. It reveals what distraction was hiding all along. Your exhaustion. Your loneliness. Your unresolved emotions. Your fear. Your disconnection from yourself. That's why people run back to noise so quickly. Because temporary distraction feels easier than honest self-awareness. But the longer you escape silence, the more emotionally distant life becomes. Until one day, you realize you've been surrounded by noise for years, and still feel completely alone inside. Maybe that loneliness feels confusing to you. Because your life might not even look bad from the outside. You still laugh sometimes. You still scroll. Still talk to people. Still function normally. But deep down, something feels disconnected. Like your mind is never fully present anywhere. And that's what overstimulation slowly does to a person. It fragments attention. Your body stays in one place, while your mind keeps escaping somewhere else. That's why modern people struggle to enjoy simple moments now. A quiet walk feels boring. Eating without videos feels strange. Waiting in silence feels unbearable. Because the brain became conditioned to constant input. And once the nervous system adapts to endless stimulation, normal life starts feeling emotionally flat. Not because life became empty. Because your attention became overstimulated. There's a difference. Think about childhood for a second. Remember how deeply moments used to feel. Music sounded magical. Rain felt calming. Small experiences felt alive. Time felt slower. Real. But now, everything feels rushed. Consumed too quickly. Forgotten instantly. And the reason is terrifyingly simple. Your mind rarely rests long enough to actually absorb life anymore. You're always half distracted. Half somewhere else. Half mentally occupied. That's why people keep saying, nothing feels real anymore. Because presence disappeared. And without presence, life starts losing emotional depth. The scary part is, most people blame themselves for this. They think they're lazy, broken, unmotivated, emotionally weak. But many times, their nervous system is simply overwhelmed. Overloaded by endless stimulation, constant information, constant comparison, constant noise. Your brain was never designed for this level of mental consumption. And yet modern life normalized it completely. Wake up, scroll, consume, compare, react, repeat, every single day. No real silence, no real reflection, no mental recovery. Just non-stop stimulation until the nervous system becomes exhausted. And exhausted minds eventually disconnect emotionally to protect themselves. That's why emotional numbness happens. Not because you stopped feeling. Because your brain got overwhelmed from feeling too much too often. So it lowers emotional intensity completely. Everything becomes dull, flat, unreal. And then people search for even more stimulation to feel alive again. More content, more scrolling, more noise, more dopamine, without realizing the stimulation itself helped create the emptiness they're trying to escape. It becomes a cycle. Noise creates disconnection. Disconnection creates emptiness. Emptiness creates more craving for distraction. And the cycle repeats again. That's why some people feel anxious the moment silence enters the room. Because silence interrupts the cycle. And when the cycle stops, the buried emotions finally rise. That's why people fear being alone at night sometimes. Not because the room is scary. Because their thoughts become impossible to ignore. And honestly, there are people who haven't truly listened to themselves in years. They immediately distract every uncomfortable feeling before it fully forms. Sadness, phone, loneliness, music, overthinking, scrolling, existential fear, entertainment, anything to avoid direct emotional contact with themselves. But avoidance always has consequences. Because emotions that never get processed don't disappear, they stay inside the nervous system quietly. And over time, they start leaking into daily life as anxiety, restlessness, emotional numbness, overthinking, mental exhaustion. That's why some people feel tired even after resting physically. Because mental overstimulation drains energy differently. Your body may stop moving, but your mind never truly rests. And eventually, you forget what inner peace even feels like. That's the real danger of constant distraction. Not wasted time, lost connection with yourself. Because the more noise fills your life, the harder it becomes to hear your real inner voice. Your genuine feelings, your intuition, your emotional needs, your authentic self. Everything gets buried underneath endless stimulation. And maybe that's why silence feels so uncomfortable now. Because deep down, part of you already knows there's something inside you waiting to be faced. Something unresolved, something emotionally neglected, something distraction kept hidden for years. And the longer you run from it, the louder your inner world becomes. Until eventually, your own mind starts feeling impossible to escape. And this is the part most people never realize until life forces them to slow down. A breakup, burnout, loneliness, failure, a quiet night where distraction suddenly stops working. And for the first time in years, they're left alone with themselves. No stimulation strong enough to fully numb what's inside anymore. That moment changes people, because eventually, every distracted mind reaches a point where the noise can't cover the emptiness anymore. And when that happens, people finally begin understanding something terrifying. They were never addicted to entertainment. They were addicted to escape. Escape from uncomfortable emotions, unprocessed pain, self-doubt, inner emptiness, fear of stillness, fear of facing who they became. Because silence has a strange power. It removes performance. No pretending, no distraction, no stimulation to hide behind. Just raw awareness. And awareness can feel brutal at first. Especially when you spent years avoiding yourself. That's why healing often feels uncomfortable in the beginning. People think peace will instantly feel calming. But an overstimulated nervous system reacts differently. When the noise disappears, withdrawal begins. Your brain searches desperately for distraction again. You feel restless, bored, anxious, emotionally exposed, almost like something is missing. Because something is missing, constant stimulation, the thing your nervous system became dependent on. That's why many people fail the moment they try to slow down. They mistake withdrawal for failure. But discomfort during silence doesn't mean something is wrong with you. It means your brain is adjusting again. Relearning stillness, relearning presence, relearning how to exist without endless interruption. And honestly, most people never reach that stage. Because the second discomfort appears, they run back to noise, back to scrolling, back to stimulation, back to constant consumption. Because temporary escape feels easier than long-term self-awareness. But there's a hidden cost to that lifestyle. The more distracted you become, the less emotionally alive life feels. Moments lose depth, relationships feel distant, time moves too fast, nothing fully reaches your heart anymore. And eventually, you start wondering why life feels emotionally empty despite constant stimulation. But stimulation was never designed to fulfill you. It only keeps your attention occupied. There's a huge difference. Occupation is not peace. Distraction is not healing. Noise is not connection. And constant stimulation is not happiness. Real peace feels different. It's slower, quieter, more present. But to experience that kind of peace, you have to survive the silence first. You have to stop running every time your inner world speaks. And that takes courage now. Because modern people became deeply uncomfortable with simply existing. No performance, no content, no stimulation, no validation, just themselves. That's why some people feel identity lost during quiet moments. Because without distraction, they don't know who they are anymore. They spent years reacting to the world, but almost no time understanding themselves. And eventually, the soul gets exhausted from that disconnection. You can feel it sometimes. That strange emotional emptiness after hours of scrolling. That weird numbness after constant stimulation. That mental exhaustion that sleep doesn't fix. Because the problem isn't physical tiredness. It's inner disconnection. Your mind keeps consuming, while your deeper self keeps starving. Starving for stillness, presence, meaning, real emotional connection. But those things only appear when attention slows down. And slowing down feels terrifying to an overstimulated brain. That's the paradox. The thing that could heal you is the exact thing your nervous system learned to avoid. Silence, stillness, presence. That's why so many people stay trapped. They keep searching outside themselves for relief, while running from the one place peace actually begins. Inside. And maybe that's the biggest tragedy of modern life. People lost connection with themselves so gradually. They didn't even notice it happening. Until one day, they sit in a quiet room alone, and realize they no longer know how to feel at peace in their own mind. But maybe, that quiet moment isn't your enemy. Maybe it's the beginning of finally hearing yourself again. Because underneath all the overstimulation, all the scrolling, all the noise, all the distraction, there's still a version of you waiting quietly to reconnect. A version that existed before your attention became fragmented. Before your nervous system became addicted to interruption. Before silence started feeling uncomfortable. And the truth is, peace was never completely gone. It just became buried under too much noise. That's why healing doesn't begin by adding more stimulation to your life. It begins by slowly removing the things keeping you disconnected from yourself. Not instantly, not perfectly, slowly, because your brain needs time to relearn stillness. At first, silence may still feel uncomfortable. Your thoughts may feel loud. Your emotions may rise unexpectedly. You may feel restless doing absolutely nothing. But that doesn't mean you're failing. It means your nervous system is finally slowing down enough to feel again. And feeling again is part of healing. Most people never allow themselves to experience that stage. They escape too quickly. The moment discomfort appears, they run back to distraction, back to noise, back to stimulation. Because modern life trained people to believe every uncomfortable feeling must be avoided immediately. But some emotions aren't problems. They're messages. Your exhaustion is a message. Your numbness is a message. Your restlessness is a message. Your inability to relax is a message. Something inside you has been emotionally neglected for too long. And silence exposes it. That's why awareness changes people so deeply. Once you finally notice the cycle, you can't unsee it anymore. You start realizing how often you reach for stimulation automatically. How uncomfortable your mind became with stillness. How disconnected you felt without even recognizing it. And slowly, you begin understanding something powerful. The goal was never to escape your mind. The goal was to reconnect with it peacefully. Because real peace does not come from endless distraction. It comes from being able to sit with yourself without needing to run away. That's freedom, not constant entertainment, not non-stop stimulation. Freedom is being emotionally okay in silence. Freedom is no longer needing noise to avoid yourself. And honestly, that might be one of the rarest abilities in the modern world now. A calm mind, a present mind, a mind that can exist quietly without panic. Because today, people are surrounded by more stimulation than ever before, yet feel more emotionally disconnected than ever. And maybe that's not a coincidence. Maybe human beings were never meant to consume this much noise every waking second. Maybe your mind wasn't built for endless scrolling, constant comparison, infinite distraction. Maybe that's why your soul feels exhausted even when your body is resting. Because overstimulation drains something deeper than energy. It drains presence. And without presence, life starts slipping past you unnoticed. Days blur together. Moments lose emotional weight. Beautiful experiences feel temporary and distant. And eventually, people stop feeling connected to their own existence. That's why learning to sit in silence again matters so much. Not because silence magically fixes everything, but because silence reconnects you to what distraction buried. Your emotions, your thoughts, your self-awareness, your humanity. And maybe the reason peace feels uncomfortable right now is because you've been separated from yourself for too long. But separation is not permanent. Attention can heal, stillness can heal, presence can heal, slowly, quietly, deeply. The same silence you fear today might eventually become the safest place you know. And one day, instead of reaching for distraction every time life becomes quiet, you'll finally be able to sit peacefully with yourself, without needing to escape. Because the moment you stop running from your inner world, is the moment real healing actually begins. And maybe that's the question you should ask yourself tonight. When the noise finally disappears, who are you left with? If this video felt uncomfortably personal, maybe that's because part of you already knew the truth. So tell me honestly, when was the last time you sat in complete silence, and genuinely felt at peace with yourself? And if you stayed until the end, subscribe, because this channel isn't just about psychology. It's about finally understanding the parts of yourself the modern world taught you to ignore.